Good evening and welcome to ILTV Insider. I'm Maayan Hoffman. As U.S. Vice President JD Vance lands in Israel, joining Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff, the question isn't just whether the Gaza ceasefire can hold, but whether it should. Tonight we'll ask what's really driving America's push and if Trump's 20-point plan for Gaza has any real future. I have with me today Dan Perry, the former chief editor of the Associated Press, Middle East and other regions, and Malkah Fleisher, who started a security organization in Yehuda Shomron called Yadayim Shelanu. Thank you for being here. So let's go ahead and get started. As we said, Vance is here in Israel. We're having a number of high-level visits. He's meeting with Netanyahu tonight, and of course, Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff have already started their meetings here in Israel. All of the American team members have been very, very vocal that we need to keep this long-term Gaza plan going. What message do you think this visit is really sending to Israel and to Hamas and certainly to the region? Dan, why don't you start?
To me, it's clear the visits at such a high level send a message that the U.S. continues to be committed to the 20-point plan. I understand that you could be more skeptical and think that what they're trying to do is to get Israel to look the other way as Hamas violates the agreement, seeks to stay in power, and makes a mockery of the 20-point plan, simply because they don't want Israel to resume the war. And I don't rule out that something in that direction is conceivable, but I think the main issue is that the U.S. actually wants the war to end on terms that are plausible and sustainable, not only because of some sort of knee-jerk Trumpian support for Netanyahu, but because, without a shadow of a doubt, the terms envisioned in the 20-point plan represent a global consensus that is aligned with the Israeli idea of what should be happening moving forward. And this is a very interesting sort of cognitive dissonance, because you would think that the world is unhappy with Israel, and certainly the vilification of Israel would suggest that, because of the brutality of the campaign, at least as we believe it went. But the reality is that the world, including people who many Israelis don't understand, are actually aligned with them, like, for example, Starmer and Macron, actually support the goals of disarming Hamas, removing Hamas, establishing a situation in Gaza that will be moderate and peaceable vis-a-vis Israel.
But I don't think anybody questions whether or not we want to have the 20-point plan go through. I think the question is whether or not it can succeed, and is the plan built in a way that it will be able to succeed without, as you said, leaving Hamas in power?
I think that that's an open question, and much depends on whether Hamas thinks there's any wiggle room to get away with anything. And a lot of the onus is on Qatar to make sure that they understand that there is not. Some people believe that Qatar actually is aligned with Hamas trying to create a fudge. I'm a little bit more sanguine about Qatar than most. They obviously have played a double game for many, many years.
And I want us to get back to Qatar, but before we jump into Qatar and Turkey and
so
all
Hamas needs to be made to understand that no reconstruction aid will go into Gaza unless they fulfill that aspect of the 20-point plan that is disarmament and essentially disbanding in Gaza. The potential fudge I can see for them is for them to say, okay, it's only in Gaza. We remain an armed organization elsewhere, which means the West Bank, which is a whole different problem, as Malkah will confirm. But at least in Gaza, for the purposes of pacifying that strip of territory, they must go. And I do believe that the Americans are serious about this. And we heard it in statements by Trump, who basically said, if they don't disarm, we'll do it for them. I don't think U.S. soldiers are coming, but they would I think, allow Israel to resume the war.
Well, and it's interesting you say that, because, Malkah, I want to turn to you. You probably know from what's happening in the news that we've had already this week some attacks by Hamas, maybe not Hamas, maybe some rebels against Israeli soldiers. 2 of them died, 3 were injured. And still, Israel voted to go ahead and move forward with the ceasefire agreements. And at the same time, we've still got 15 hostage bodies that were committed to begin coming out. They started coming out within 72 hours of the deal. Why do you believe that it is okay that we continue with the ceasefire when all those bodies haven't come home?
Look, you have some of the most senior, some of the most trusted advisors to the current U.S. administration, all in Israel right now, all landing on one spot, which is at the desk of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. It's not like a friendly visit of tourism. It's to hold Israel's feet to the fire. All of Israel can feel the pressure that the United States is applying on Israel right now. And it is, I feel like we're getting a lot of Gush Katif flashbacks. We're getting a lot of 2005 flashbacks in which we leave a piece of territory. We say now is the opportunity for peace, and it blows up in our face, literally. We had Hamas killing 2 of our boys in the field after the ceasefire has begun. We have them issuing a statement to the populace just a day or 2 ago that we are going to clear the field of all the unexploded ordnance to protect people, right? Because we care about you, Hamas says to the people after they have totally obliterated their society over the course of 2 years. We're going to clear the ordnance. What does that mean? We've seen this before. This is what they do every time we go into battle with them and then withdraw from territory, which is they come back into the territory, they take all the things that we left there, and then they use them against us again.
So do you think that if there is another serious violation that the ceasefire might actually collapse? Maybe the government won't even let it move forward. Malkah, do you think that Netanyahu will eventually say to Trump or Vance, whoever it is, no, like they keep killing our men?
I definitely think that the United States has a certain agenda when it comes to this ceasefire, and that the #1 top priority is not Israel's security in that agenda. But I also think that the Netanyahu administration knows that it can only push the Israeli people so far. Right now, the people of Israel are very happy that the hostages have been returned, and they're happy that also deceased hostages are being returned. But there is huge, widespread skepticism about how this will affect Israel's long-term security. There is no one in this country who thinks that it's a good idea for our children to be fighting another October 7th again. And there is a lot of anger at the possibility that that's exactly what's happening. One of what was supposed to be our major war goal, which was the destruction of Hamas, looks like it's actually getting farther and farther from us. There are reports coming out that Hamas is part of picking the technocratic government. It's like, you can't make this stuff up. It's like, how much blundering can we do? We cannot afford it. And therefore, I think that the Israeli people are going to give a very limited window to the possibility of this ceasefire. And I don't think most Israelis believe that it's really going to do any good.
And Stan, do you believe that too? Do you agree with Malkah that Hamas is clearly taking a role that it shouldn't be taking, and maybe even possibly being empowered by Qatar, Turkey, Egypt, others who are quote unquote Muslim Brotherhood? Or, what is the reason, and what is the reason that you think that the U.S. is pushing so hard for this to go through, other than world peace, Nobel Peace Prizes, etc.?
I mean, I would be a little bit cynical about the Nobel Peace Prize issue, but I wouldn't be so skeptical about the general desire to end the war, which has been ruinous for all sides, including for Israel, and which has created much disruption in the world, politically speaking. Probably helped Trump get elected, certainly helped the Democrats lose. I think it's more complex than how Malkah portrays. The Israeli people are not agitating for a return to the war. Every single poll, without exception, overwhelmingly, showed that over 70% of the people, in some polls 80%, were prepared to accept the deal that returns the live hostages, all the hostages.
But those people were ready to accept a plan in which the hostages come back and Israel remains secure. They are not ready to accept a plan in which the hostages come back and then security is totally out the window.
Malkah, you may be like chief of staff level strategist, but most Israeli people are not. And the people answering these polls, the public at large in Israel, were prepared to accept a plan that returns the hostages and ends the war. Without further caveats, they were prepared to do this with the understanding that if the implication is that Hamas more or less stays in power in Gaza, which was a deal on the table for over a year now, probably for almost 2 years, that probably means they'll have to fight Hamas again. And they were prepared to do that.
I don't know what you're talking about. The people of Israel fought like lions to destroy this Hamas. They sent the best of their sons and daughters out to destroy Hamas. So when you say that the people of Israel were ready for a future Hamas, that is fantasy land. The people of Israel are not ready for more Hamas. And we put all of our hopes and all of our effort into destroying Hamas. That was the war goal. That was the war goal. And if we don't meet this goal, then we failed.
Okay, Israel did fail. If the goal was to eradicate Hamas, Israel failed because from the beginning it was not possible to do so while Hamas held Israeli hostages. That limited the idea's freedom of movement and made from the beginning the twin goals of eradicating Hamas and saving the hostages be in conflict. So the idea is, and it's not a fantasy, The vast majority of Israelis were prepared to end the war, get back the hostages, and fight another day, which they assumed would happen because of a future Hamas provocation. Now, Hamas will
The vast majority of Israelis were ready to continue a war that would lead to total victory.
And whoever wants to Google, are the Israelis ready to end the war in exchange for the hostages, will discover I'm right. So the implication, though, is that if Hamas stays in power in Gaza, there's going to be another war at some point. That's not a great outcome. However, it possibly was the only possible outcome, given that they held these hostages. The only good thing that one can say is that if, in the end, a version of the war resumes, because anything else is inevitable with Hamas remaining in Gaza, it will be under different circumstances, because Israel is no longer limited by Hamas holding hostages.
Well, let's talk about those circumstances for a moment, because right now the circumstances are that Qatar, Turkey, countries that were at enemy status with the state of Israel until this 20-point plan was revealed, are now essentially governing. In fact, we've seen Turkish equipment working in Gaza to rebuild, sitting on the border. Turkey was one of the strongest enemies of Israel at different points, allies, but in the recent years, wars.
Strong enemy.
Strong enemy. Well, I mean, different
very
points
problematic semi-neighbor.
Very problematic ally and enemy at all of its points, but it's certainly throughout this war, it has been one of our strongest enemies. It has been one of the loudest and most vocal enemies against Israel in the public square, and it has been very dangerous for Israel in the way that it supports Hamas, and now it is kind of helping to eradicate Hamas for Israel. How is that possible? How do we trust Qatar and Turkey?
Well, Israel more than trusts Turkey. Israel's had a subterranean military alliance with Turkey, even while Erdogan fulminates against the war in Gaza and really Israel in general. Israel has a massive trade relationship with Turkey. Israel probably doesn't want Turkey to be a full-blown enemy, and it hasn't been. What it has had is a hothead president who courts Islamist opinion by anti-Semitic and anti-Zionist statements.
Dan, in the last 2 years, trade has dropped tremendously with Turkey, or it's had to go through third parties. It hasn't been coming in. It almost
also, the military alliance isn't what it was.
But I'm just saying they're not an enemy.
So here's how to view this. One way is to say, well, Turkey and Qatar are Muslim Brotherhood, and anything they have to do with anything is toxic and poisonous. Another way to view it is we have to bring them into the fold. Take the case of Qatar. Qatar hosts the largest American airbase in the region in a radius of thousands of miles.
And hosts Hamas at the same time.
Qatar's skies are basically protected by the U.S., which is why I remain skeptical that Israel dared attack it without organizing with the U.S., no matter what they say in public. Qatar has over $1 trillion in investments in the U.S. allowed by the U.S. And of course they do their skullduggeries also. It is a strategic goal of the West to bring Qatar over on side. And the same applies with Turkey. The U.S. is going to provide Turkey with F-35s. If Israel were an enemy of Turkey, that would be a big problem. But Turkey's a NATO member, and Qatar just got NATO-level guarantees from the U.S. So the story is more complex. If you take certainly your critic, and some would be your enemy, and let them be part of the Gaza reconstruction, you could argue that's a good thing along the level of a unity government, because you defend your opposition. That's going to be interesting. You notice that the UAE and Saudi Arabia were not in Sharm at the ridiculous festival.
Why?
They're skeptical because, look, don't forget, about a decade ago, Saudi Arabia and Egypt led a whole group of moderate Sunni dictatorships that hated Qatar for supporting the Muslim Brotherhood. And they were made to reconcile partly by Western pressure. So right now there's a quite strategic move to make Qatar and Turkey be part of the Western alliance and part of a future strategic umbrella in the Middle East that might include Israel and the moderate Sunni states. It is delicate. And this is the American dream. So I would view the presence of Kushner and others in Israel as a perhaps naive, but ultimately laudable effort to bring everyone together, with the ultimate goal being the disarming of Hamas. I think it's so critical that all of us together make clear to all the meddlers and the mediators that this is a be-all and end-all. This has to be, and there's no way to let it go. Little fudges, can Hamas say we appointed a particular technocrat? Maybe, but their military operation has to be crushed.
Okay, so I want to ask you more about this. Let's turn to you for a moment. With Jared Kushner and Witkoff, you mentioned they're here, laudable efforts, okay? They gave their first big interview just the other day, 60 Minutes. And one of the things that Jared Kushner said was actually very interesting, right? He said that Israel must start helping the Palestinians and improving their quality of life if it wants full regional integration. So what does that actually mean, Malkah? You know, you live in Yehuda and Shomron. You know what it looks like in practice. What would this mean? And is it realistic for Israel to be helping the Palestinians right now while we're still burying our dead and rebuilding what's been broken in the last 2 years in this country?
It's the kind of thing that you say. Jared Kushner said the kind of thing that you say when you utterly are untouched by what has happened over the last 2 years. Like, you have to be so far removed from the feelings and the pain and the desires of the people of Israel that you could say something like that Israel has to prioritize exactly the population that exactly attacked us, exactly raped and pillaged our towns, took our hostages, fought us and killed our children for 2 years. And now what we ought to do, I have to say, like, I'm not sure that priority number one is getting the approbations of the countries like Qatar, which funds to the billions of dollars anti-Semitic education in the United States, in Europe, or Turkey, where Erdogan 7 months ago, something like that, said Allah should destroy the Zionist entity, or El-Sisi, is always decrying us. There is some kind of force that is trying to yank us back to October 6th. And the people of Israel are just much too awake for this today. We are prioritizing ourselves. We are prioritizing our security. We are prioritizing our survival. All that has to come first. I think it was Golda Meir who said something like, I would rather be unliked and alive than liked and dead, something like that. It's like Israel is no longer so enamored of the international community, which has come against us so hard and excoriated us so unfairly over the last 2 years and bought into every salacious slander against the state of Israel. We no longer care so much about being accepted into that community.
So go ahead, respond.
Yeah. Where to begin?
It has to be short.
Obviously, there's a big anti-Semitic problem in the world and so forth. But as I said before, most of the world's governments support Israel's goals. Israel has survived in a hostile region on the strength of its resilience, yes, you're right, but also on the strength of its prosperity. Its prosperity and its relations with the world have been part of the qualitative advantage that enabled Israel to defeat Arab armies and Arab societies that were much larger. Israel's an export-oriented economy. It needs to have good relations with the world.
And a security economy.
Israel cannot
We have
continue.
survived despite the horrible policies.
Israel cannot continue the war for more than a week without American approval, and that's a fact. Now, look, I'm less eager than Malkah to be at war with the entire planet. And the Israelis...
I have no desire to be at war with the planet, but I have a little bit of dignity.
The Israelis... dignity will not look so good when you're defeated. And Israel's success depends on good relations with the world. And by the way, the Israelis and the Palestinians...
Our success depends on our strength.
I have something...
That's why the Abraham Accords came to be, because we look like a strong player in this region. Not because we look like someone who's great at listening to the United States.
Doesn't come from banging your head against the wall and being at war with everyone, including your allies.
Strength comes from victory and from vanquishing your enemies.
So, as to Jared Kushner, yeah, he may be a little bit naive, and I don't know.
He also maybe has some conflicts of interest.
And he
in
has,
the
of course, a lot of business interests in the Gulf. But Israel and the Palestinians are fated to be living in close proximity, even if, God willing, some sort of separation is eventually enacted, despite what I believe to be Malkah's opposition to any partition plan, despite the fact that leaves Israel half Arab. So I'm hoping for a partition. But even a partition would leave the Palestinians as close neighbors. And it is probably a better idea.
It leaves them as close neighbors because no one helped them as refugees during the last 2 years of this war. And they kept them here on purpose to use as bargaining chips against us.
Yes,
it is probably a better idea to have them be somewhat prosperous and reasonably content in a rational, pragmatic way. I'm not saying that will make them love Jews, but it's a better thing than to have them be impoverished.
But hold on, but Dan, let me ask you a question. Is that Israel's job? Because 100%, we want everybody to live in peace and prosperity in Israel, the region, the world. But is that Israel's job?
So right now, when Israel basically occupies the West Bank, I'm afraid it is Israel's job. In a future, the hoped-for future, when Israel gets together the wit to separate itself from parts of the West Bank that are heavily populated with Palestinians, it's still wise, just as it's wise for the prosperous West to help out the developing South. It's wise. So basically, up until now, Israel has not seemed to feel a lot of urgency about making sure the Palestinians, practically speaking, have a decent life. It is a good idea for Israel to start considering that as part of its overall strategic equation out of, if nothing else, self-interest.
Now, we only have about 2 minutes left, and I want you to be able to give one final thought about this 20-point plan. We've got Witkoff here. We've got Kushner here. We have Vance here. Today, the Egyptian intelligence minister met with Prime Minister Netanyahu. We have him here in the country. Everybody is working to move this plan forward. 30 seconds, Dan, and really 30 seconds. Should the plan move forward, and do you believe it can?
I'd like the plan to move forward because it is a rational, good plan. For it to move forward, Hamas has to understand that there's no wiggle room and they simply have to disarm and let go of Gaza completely. This comes down to the region making it clear to Hamas that this is a sine qua non, and basically all reconstruction aid should be conditioned on this. That needs to be the main thing.
Malkah, 30 seconds, same question. Will the 20-point plan go through, and should it?
If Israel stops before it destroys terror, it is kicking the can down the road to its children. It is not only failing its own children, my children, your children, but it is failing the children of the world who are all looking to Israel to see how is it that you're supposed to deal with terrorism. Do you ask them to be pragmatic and make sure they have no wiggle room, or do you destroy terrorism? Do you create a safe society by saying that some ideologies and some practices are unacceptable? Zero tolerance, not 5% tolerance, not tolerance if it makes the United States happy, but zero tolerance. We are a nation that is built on security, the only Jewish state in the entire world, and we are here to protect our people and to create a safe future for the Jewish people as the whole world watches how to do it.
I have to say the Jewish people have been rather successful throughout history by a combination, certainly in the Zionist era, of brains and brawn. I suggest we don't go for brawn only.
I don't think there's anything stupid about making sure that your children can sleep safe at night.
I think the 20-point plan, if it's carried out as designed by the Americans and the Israelis, would bring about a good outcome that the people of Israel want. And I think all people of good faith in the world want, and that probably includes most Palestinians.
I think that what you're saying
Malkah,
is something.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to ask you not to respond because we are out of time tonight. Unfortunately, I'll have to let our viewers decide whether or not the 20-point plan is as Malkah described or Dan. So thank you so much for all of our viewers for watching Insider. You can catch extended conversations and the behind-the-scenes analyses on the ILTV podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Maayan Hoffman. Thanks for watching, and good night from Israel.